Mainstream to the Bible on what subject? Okay. Okay, I just wasn't sure. I didn't follow. Yeah. Right. Okay. So it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Is anything off limits? That's the title for this evening, and I'm just gonna start off by saying very um, quickly, we're not really gonna talk about rock and roll because there is nothing objectionable to the way a guitar is strummed this way or that. We can talk about the kind of language used in today's musical lyrics. We can talk about violent video games and all of that stuff, that kind of consumption, a different time. Um, but I'll be honest, it was really just a part of the catchy title, or not so catchy, either way, however you want to look at it. So rock and roll is definitely allowed. The parts that we're going to spend time on today are sex and drugs. So the question comes up, right? What do we know biblically? No pun intended. I said what did we know, not who do we know biblically, about sex. What is the Torah? Let's start with the Bible, the actual 5 books of the Torah. What does it say about sex? Don't everybody jump at once. It is good and there's a lot of it going on. Okay. It's funny because I started on this subject. I'm wondering if we should tackle drugs or sex first. Do you guys have an opinion, a preference? Okay. All right, we're not going to have as much time then for drugs because whatever we start with, we're going to spend more time on. We're going to spend more time on this subject. So, the first mention of anything to do with sex in the Bible, in the Torah, is where? Genesis. That's a big book. Okay, Adam knew Eve. When did it say he knew her? There's something before that. First, we know they're naked, but it doesn't say they had sex. Okay, so what's the first mention of actual intercourse? No, they knew they were naked. They didn't know they hadn't had sex. Yeah. Before that, it is in the it is in the story of creation. And you shall be fruitful and multiply. Right? We know that that's a commandment given at the Garden of Eden. And it's interesting. We're going to talk about the creation story of the Garden of Eden in both subjects tonight, sex and drugs. But in terms of the sexual aspect of it, we're told the first kind of, I guess if you would call it a mitzvah, you can call it a mitzvah, the first commandment given to mankind, to humankind, is be fruitful and multiply. So is that the biblical view of sex, that sex is for procreation? Why do you say apparently so? So that means that encapsulates all of the... Okay, but you've said 2 different things. First I asked, is that all it's about? And you said yes. And then you said it's the first thing. So is it the first thing or the only thing? Is procreation the first thing or the only thing that we should take from sex in terms of biblically? Yeah. Okay, good answer. It's a 50-50 shot. Better than the Knicks odds last night, unfortunately. Anyway, so the first mention is be fruitful and multiply. Then we have stories, and blank knew blank, right? We know that when the Bible says that somebody knew someone else, that is an idiom for the fact that they had sex. Then there's a couple of stories. There's the story of Dinah, someone mentioned, one of Jacob's children, his only daughter in the Torah, where she's raped, right? Although if you read the Red Tent, it's a very different take on what happened to Dinah. And then there's the story of Judah, right? Does anybody know the story of Judah when it comes to sex? What's the story? He went to a prostitute. Yeah, it was his daughter-in-law, Tamar, right? So Judah goes to a prostitute, not somebody who thought was a prostitute. She was a prostitute. She dressed up as a prostitute and was at the corner. I mean, she's literally at the corner. She's at the gates, welcoming strangers. And he has sex with her, and she says, I want you to pay me. He can't pay her, and he leaves her a signet, a ring, and a staff. And then a few months later, they find out she's pregnant, and they're going to string her up. They're going to execute her for harlotry and for idolatry. And she says, the person who knocked me up, the person whose child I'm carrying, is the owner of this ring and this staff. You can, phallus, whatever. We can talk about that another time. And then he realizes it's his. Right? So that's the first kind of story we have with morality, that, right? A really in-depth. So what's the problem there? What's the immorality that occurs in that story? Hold on. Yeah, my. It's interesting. She doesn't come off as the immoral one. No, she's the hero of the story. No. So, by the way, it's interesting. Nobody fell into the trap. So, here's what's not immoral about this story: the fact that they had sex out of marriage. There is no biblical prohibition to sex outside of marriage. Now, if you're married to another person and have sex with someone who's married, that's a different story. But this idea that premarital sex is forbidden is not a biblical idea. Okay? The reason he's kind of hoisted on his own petard is because he doesn't pay her. He doesn't make good on his promise to her. And that's why he was immoral. Not because he had sex with her, but because he didn't honor his word. Excuse me. Both in terms of he didn't pay her what he was supposed to pay her for services rendered, and he did promise her his last son. So the story is a little more complicated than just the daughter-in-law seducing her father-in-law. This daughter-in-law married his son, he died, so he married her other son. She married his other son, he died, and then there was a third son, and he said, I will give you to him in marriage, and he doesn't do it. And so she traps him. Okay. I'm going to switch back and forth. This one has too much of an echo, so I'm going to use this for a little bit. So we have this idea of premarital sex being okay. Now, that's in Genesis, right? Don't really have a lot in Shemot, in Exodus, about sex, but we do in Vayikra, in Leviticus. What comes up with sex in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus? So there is a list of prohibited relationships. What else? There's also the idea of when you can and when you can't. Now, I'm talking about even if you are prescribed for each other and it's legal and you're married and all that stuff, there are still times you cannot have sex, according to the Torah. What are those? What? Nida, right? What is nida? I know the men are terrified to use that word. I saw the looks on their faces. They were absolutely panicked. It's called menstruation, gentlemen, okay? It's not a secret. Happens to the majority of the population. Well, actually, I don't know. Maybe not the majority. Well, at one point or another in their lives, and then... So, here's the thing. People often cite the laws of nidah, of family purity, to say, see, sex is for procreation. Right? Okay. So, once your spouse is past the age in which she menstruates, does that mean you're forbidden to each other? The answer is hell no. Okay? The answer is abso-freaking-lutely not. Right? And it also, if someone is barren or someone cannot have children, you absolutely still have a commandment to have sex. Notice what I just said. What did I just say? Commanded to have sex. Who is commanded to have sex? The man. The man is commanded to please his wife, not the other way around. You don't have to shake your head so emphatically, Natalie, but that's okay. So I want to go from the biblical to the rabbinic when it comes to this topic, because we don't live biblical Judaism, right? Normative Judaism is not a biblical religion. I know that sounds weird, and some people think it's shocking, but it's true. No better example than an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. What do? We do something else. We do the monetary value, which is a rabbinic change on the Torah. And the rabbis change the Torah all the time. So, what do the rabbis say about sex? And it's not as clear. There are two very different strands of how rabbis decide to read it. Some are very sex positive, some are very affirmative, and that sex is a good thing, and others, not so much. I'll be honest, I could have gone down both, but I'm biased. So I'm going to tend to pick these texts that are more sex positive. Okay? So, here's a story told in the Gemara. The Gemara relates that Rav Kahana entered and lay beneath Rav's bed. Okay, Rav Kahana is the student of Rav. Rav Kahana goes underneath Rav's bed. So the student goes underneath the bed of the teacher. He heard his teacher chatting and laughing with his wife and seeing to their needs. Meaning, right. Rav Kahana said, he was so, not only were they seeing to their needs, but when the student noticed this, he actually commented from under the bed. And he said, wow, the mouth of Rav, my teacher, is like a person who has never eaten a cooked dish. He's like a starving man. What does that mean? Not just vocal. He's voracious. He's passionate, right? And it's interesting. We could. I'm not going to go into detail on this one, but you can. What specific act does he mention? Well, he's talking about his mouth is like one who has never eaten a cooked dish. So we're not going to say necessarily it was about oral sex, though you could make that inference. Okay. Rav, I'm adding this, startled, I'm sure, turns to him and says, Kahana, you're here? Leave. And Rav Kahana said to him, this too is Torah and I must learn it. Okay? Let's unpack that. What is this telling us? Okay, other than the lack of education Rav Kahana's had, what does this teach us about the Torah or Judaism and sex? It shows us they're not unrelated. It shows us that Judaism has what to teach us about sex. It shows us that Judaism has a way in which, a prescribed way of going about it. Right? It does not shy away from having the conversation. This too is Torah. This too is part of what you're teaching me. Now, you could also just say, wow, that guy's a weirdo hiding under people's bed. He's a little bit of a voyeur. But you can do that with a lot of text. I actually want to read something into it a little bit more meaningful than that. Now, from whose perspective is this story told? I mean, yes, it's a third-person narrative, but who's the star of this? The student, Rav Kahana, absolutely. And whose voice is absolutely nowhere to be found? How do you think she felt? Okay, all right, thank you, Natalie. Right. Is it Tuesday already? Right. So, let me read you one of the Mishnah, okay? Now, this is a law in the Mishnah Ketubot, right? Which is a tractate that deals with what? Marriage, the writing of a ketubah, the writing of a marriage document. What? Marriage license, yeah. The law of providing sexual pleasure to one's wife that is stated in the Torah is as follows. Okay? So here's what you owe your wife. Somebody who's at leisure, daily. So gentlemen who are retired, get a lot of exercise. Laborers, twice a week. Donkey drivers, why do you think that's different? They're gone once a week. Camel drivers, once every 30 days, right? So they travel longer distances. Navigators, every 6 months, because they're at sea. So, laborers, twice a week. Men at leisure, every day. Okay? So not only, by the way, does it say the word procreation in there? No. It says pleasure. Providing sexual pleasure. That's the commandment. It says nothing about bibis. Not at all. All right, I just want to make sure everybody's with me so far. Anybody going to faint? Everybody okay? All right. Sorry? So far. Mike's got a big smile on his face. That's good. I like it. I like it. All right. So, this is a longer story. So let me just, I'm going to kind of paraphrase. So, with regard to one who vows that his wife may not derive benefit from marital relations with him, what kind of benefit? Pleasure. Thank you, Jerry. That's my shill, right? So somebody who makes a pledge and says, I'm not going to please my wife. Beit Shammai says he can stay married to her for up to 2 weeks, but beyond that, he must divorce her and give her the payment for the marriage contract. Beit Hillel says if it's more than a week, he's got to divorce her. So if you're a son of a bitch, if you're really not caring about your wife's needs, that's grounds for divorce. You must give her a get. Right? Then it talks about the same kind of thing. And so the Mishnah we talked about daily or twice a week or all that stuff, they add students who are leaving to go learn Torah. They may leave without their wife's permission for up to 30 days, but then they have to come home. So you can go on a month-long sabbatical without permission, though I wouldn't recommend it. Right? Happy wife? Thank you. Right? You can do that, but they wouldn't say that's a good idea. So I want to pause here for questions, because you all seem very tired. And we're talking about sex, and that should not be the most depressive, tiring conversation ever. Say more. So it's interesting. There are a lot of texts, and I didn't get, because we could spend literally 2 hours on this one, we could spend more than that on this one subject. I didn't go into detail. There are some conversations about women's libidos, though not many. And there is some danger, according to some of the rabbis, in giving in to libidinous desires. I'm going to point to one of those right now. So the Babylonian Talmud talks in Tractate Nida, which is about the laws of family purity, which is about the laws of menstruation. It's talking about these different precautions and things you can't do. And why? Why these precautions? Because otherwise one might emit semen in vain. And Rabbi Yochanan stated, whosoever emits semen in vain deserves death. What's the sin? What's the sin? Sorry? But what's the sin? What are they doing? That's the consequence. What's the actual act? Masturbation, or anything, it's also called bia kedarka, right? Sex in not the way, it means a wasting semen. Now, we talked about Yehuda and Tamar. One of Tamar's husbands, anybody know what her first husband's name was? Onan. Now, what is onanism? Right. So some rabbis got to the idea that onanism, masturbation, is a sin punishable by living death. Right. So Judaism doesn't get it always get it right. Their medical understanding was not good. They didn't understand that semen is produced, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but regularly and dies in your body regularly. They thought there was a limited amount and you are literally wasting semen. Not how it works. To go on a tangent for a second, we talk about the lack of conversation around sex with our teenagers or pubescents or adolescents. That actually gets worse in terms of masturbation, right? It's hard enough to talk about sex. In a lot of ways, it's actually harder and more stigmatized to talk about masturbation, right? Because, and this may shock you, for men, there's a stigma against masturbating. Not because it's not healthy or because of all those things, but do you know why there might be why might there be a stigma for boys, for adolescents, for boys who masturbate? Because they can't get a girl to do it for them. Right? This goes to the core of objectification of women. Right? That you're sitting at home and what's the matter? You can't get a girl. Right? That's instead of seeing it as a healthy expression of sexuality, which thankfully we are more and more for girls, we need to see it for both, but we don't talk about it. Right? I actually invited the U.S. Wires to come join us tonight. Nope. Yeah. Well, I think if you talk to her about masturbation, I think talking with her grandmother is going to be very comfortable for her. I think that's always an easy conversation to have. I'm just kidding. But by the way, that kind of idea of wasting semen, what other prohibition do you think might grow out of that? Specifically for men. No, not, yes, but go a little further. Say it again. Between men. Right? At least part of the biblical prohibition against male homosexuality, which is, there is none for female homosexuality, by the way, not mentioned in the Torah, though female sexuality in general is not really mentioned in the Torah, so that's another problem. But male homosexuality in the Torah is forbidden, at least in part, because of this concept of wasting semen, of not being able to procreate. Right? I want to read you from not exactly the most, embodied human being in the world, Maimonides, who was pretty much an intellectual and very, hyper-intellectual. He said, and now I apologize for the unegalitarian, the very sexist language. A man's wife is permitted to him. Let's overcome that concept. Therefore, a man may do whatever he desires with his wife, meaning whatever they both want. He may engage in relations whenever they desire, kiss any organ he desires, engage in vaginal or other intercourse, or engage in physical intimacy without relations, provided he does not release seed in vain. Ooh, there's that little catch at the end. But then again, he says, nevertheless, it is pious for a person not to act frivolously concerning such matters, and to sanctify themselves at the time of relations, as explained in Hilchot Deot. Our sages do not derive satisfaction from a person who engages in sexual relations excessively and frequents his wife like a rooster. This reflects a very blemished character. So what is sex? Okay. And I'm going to give you another text about that. Neither sexual, this is from the Igrit HaKodesh, which is 13th century. Neither sexual organs nor sexual intercourse are obscene, for how could God create something that contains an obscenity? God created man and woman and all their organs and functions with nothing obscene in them. When you engage in sexual union, do not behave lightheartedly and regard this act as vain, idle, and proper. Therefore, first, this is the Barry White of Holy. Listen to this. First, introduce her into the mood with gentle words that excite her emotion, appease her mind, and delight her with joy. Yeah. Thus, you unite your mind and intention with her. Say to her words which in part arouse her passion, closeness, love, will, and erotic desire, and in part evoke in her reverence for God, piety, and we'll do that, forget it. Any sexual union without an abundance of passion, love, and will is without the divine presence. That's the line I wanted to focus on. So, sex is, I'm going to give you multiple choice. A, immoral. B, moral. C, amoral. D, no, I forgot. So, what's the answer? Moral? Okay. So if it depends, then it's C. It's neither moral nor immoral. It's amoral. Right? But it's not. The reason I was going to go to more options is because it's not just those. Because this idea actually has not just moral, immoral, but what element does he introduce in sex just now? Holy. Yeah. That it's actual a spiritual act. And by the way, this is not some new-aged, progressive rabbi talking. This is 13th century, and that concept is even older. Right? Some of you have heard me say this over and over and over again, and I apologize. Anybody know who Rabbi Akiva was? Who was Rabbi Akiva? No, that was Hillel. Hillel and Shammai. Rabbi Akiva was arguably the greatest rabbi in the times of the Mishnah. He didn't learn until he was 40. Right. Right. That's true. But what about his stature? He becomes one of the most important rabbis, if not the most important rabbi in the Mishnah. Now, the reason I bring him up is he's because of his bona fides, because of his credentials. He offers what he thinks is the holiest book in the entire Tanakh, in the entire Torah, prophets, and writings. Jerry, you've heard me say this, so don't answer. Don't answer if you've heard me say this. You've heard me say this. What is the holiest book in all of Judaism? Yeah, you've heard me say it too. Song of Songs, not Breshit, not Shmot with the 10 Commandments, but Song of Songs. And in that book, what's the relationship between God and the Jewish people? It's not just love. Sexual lovers, yeah. It talks about shadayim. It talks about breasts. It talks about, right, which, by the way, if you really want a laugh, read the Art Scroll translation, because if you're reading the English translation in Art Scroll as you're reading Shir HaShirim, you'll look to the Hebrew, you're like, where are Aaron and Moses mentioned over? It says Aaron and Moshe, Aaron and Moshe, Aaron and Moshe. And then you look at the footnote, it's like, every time it says breasts, we're going to translate it as Aaron and Moshe. No joke. No joke. Because clearly God didn't mean it wasn't right. Okay, fine. I want to talk, so the reason it's amoral is because what's the basis of it? What part of us does it come from? Say that in English. Urge. Urge. Right? Ta'ava, passion, desire, right? What word would you use in English? Right? Now here's the question. The Talmud and other places say that human beings are both animals and angelic at the same time. What part of us is sex? You could argue it's animal. Okay. So if that's the case, then the rabbis have two concepts of inclination, of urge, if you will. What are the two? Tov. The Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov, literally translated as the bad inclination or evil inclination and the good inclination. Some of us don't like that idea, don't like that phrasing, okay? And the rabbis of the Talmud don't even like that phrasing, and I'm going to show you why. In Breshit Rabbah, which is a Mishnaic midrash, which is a Second Temple midrash, comes before the Talmud, before the Gemara. They're talking about Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, two different kinds of inclinations, often, like I said, evil and good inclination. Follow me? So what would be an example of a good inclination action? So charity, something like that, yeah? What else? All right, doing a mitzvah. What would be an evil inclination act? Hurting somebody, theft, right? All of these things. Right? So let's remember that for a second. Here's Breshit Rabbah. Rabbi Nachman, not Rebbe Nachman, who comes much later, said in the name of Rav Shmuel, "Behold, it was good." Where does the "it was good" come? Where do you know that phrase? Right. Thank you. Vayehi tov, and it was good, which happens how many times? 6 times. Actually, 5 times. Maybe. But it happens at the end of every day. And it was good, morning was good, right? Behold, it was good refers to the good desire. That makes sense, right? But since it's in creation, everything's made in creation, where does the evil desire fit in? Behold, it was very good refers to the evil inclination. Proof for this is there's only one animal in creation with an evil desire, with a Yetzer Hara. What animal is that? Mankind. And when mankind is created, it's not Vayehi Tov. What is it? Vayehi Tov Me'od. It is very good. So because the only time in creation it says it was very good is when human beings were created, the argument is, why is this very good and everything else is good? Because the evil inclination. So they don't really think of it as evil inclination. Okay? They wrote, can the evil desire be very good? That would be extraordinary. But without the evil desire, no person would build a house, take a wife, and have children. That it's our evil desire, if you will. It's our Yetzer Hara that motivates all those things. The rabbis go further. The ancient sages decided they were going to capture and imprison the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. Okay, so they captured it. They ordered a complete fast of 3 days, whereupon the Yetzer surrendered, turned himself in, and they imprisoned him. He came forth from the Holy of Holies like a fiery lion. The Yetzer said to them, realize that if you kill me, the world is finished. So they held him for 3 days, imprisoned. Then they looked in the whole land of Israel, and not an egg could be found. Not an egg. What shall we do now? Shall we kill him? Shall we beg for half mercy? So what does it mean? Why was there no eggs? Why were there no eggs? Yeah, there's nobody's procreating. Animals, right? Nothing is happening. Without the Yetzer Hara, we would never have children. We would never build things. You look skeptical, Natalie. What doesn't make sense? Jerry? There you go. Yeah, Zissel. I'm sorry, can you translate the Yiddish? Tsaris, I know, is misery. I do, uh, for those of you watching at home, we're going to take a break for no. Yeah, okay. Something in Yiddish was said that I still don't understand, so I apologize if it's not coming through. Hakatsuris. I understand what gehakt is chop, and how do you chop tsuris? I know it chopping tsimis. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, so when it comes to sex, right? Sex is like eating, right? That's the first metaphor we saw, and people here are going, yeah, yeah, pretty much, yeah, yeah, yeah. I get hungry 3 times a day. Okay, yeah, that works. I don't know if I can go longer. Okay, but eating is not moral or immoral; it's amoral. But when you say a bracha, you're elevating what you're eating. When you say the kiddush, you're sanctifying a piece of not so great wine. Sorry for those Manischewitz lovers in the crowd, but the sugar industry really thanks you for your support. It's what we do with it, right? And we were taught, many of us, that it's our head and our heart, right? That there are 2 parts of us, our physical side and our neshama. Our physical, right? What's a neshama? Soul. That we have our physical body and our spiritual body. And that somehow they're separate. And that's the biggest problem, is that we don't understand the embodied nature of both of them, right? There are places where they come together. Some would say prayers, others would say meditation. All of these different places where your physical being and your spiritual being are not at odds, they're not contrasting, they're actually together, right? And sex can be an important part of that. And I just want to go back to this one line. Any sexual union without an abundance of passion, love, and will is without the divine presence. That when you have sex in a mindful, embodied way and you bring all of yourself to it, that you're actually making room also for the Shekhinah, for the presence of God, the divine presence. It's beautiful. One other thing, and this will kind of segue us into the next topic. In the Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud, there's 2 Talmuds. Rav Chizkiah said in the name of Rav, "You will one day give reckoning for everything your eyes saw, which, although permissible, you did not enjoy." What does that say? Yeah. If I can find it again. You will one day give reckoning for everything your eyes saw, which, although permissible, you did not enjoy. Somebody say that back to me in English. So I'm gonna save you before you anger your spouse, um, but not necessarily a different person, but any part of pleasure that you denied yourself is not a mitzvah, right? We have a very powerful ascetic tradition. Do you know what I mean by ascetic? Giving up things, right? That if you go without pleasure, somehow you're holier. That's saying, no, 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 no. You're not holy for giving up pleasure. You're stupid. Right? You are allowed to do it, right? God gave you all of this body and all of your organs and all of your, to eat what you should eat, to have sex in the way you can have sex, to be fully experiencing your life. And if you don't, you'll have to answer for that, right? Last year I taught a class that was called Judaism, a Celebration of the Erotic. And I fully believe that Judaism is a very erotic religion. Now, what do I mean by that? I don't mean erotic as in necessarily sexual. What does the word erotic mean? It's of or pertaining to what? What's the root? The shoresh of the word erotic? Eros. Love or physical, right? Which is different. And by the way, ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha. And you shall love God with all of your heart, all of your soul, and all of your very. Right? Not from a chaste kind of way. You should really love God and embody that love. And eros is not just a sexual thing. It's a love for pleasure, it's the life force, right? In terms of psychology, Freud talks about two drives, the eros, I think it's eros and pathos, if I'm not mistaken, the life force and the death force. And Judaism celebrates life. How many times is the afterlife mentioned in the Torah? 0. Nen. 9. Zilch. 0. Fs. Right? So we need to get from this life. And that's what I mean by erotic. Right? Esther Perel, some of you may know who she is. She's a psychotherapist, famous psychotherapist who's written a couple of books. One was called Mating in Captivity. She's done TED Talks. She's brilliant. She grew up in Belgium. In Belgium, in a Jewish woman, and her community was made up a lot by a lot of the percentage, a high percentage of the people in her Jewish community were what? Holocaust survivors. And she said there were two different types of survivors, she said. Those who lived and those who just didn't die. And the difference was eros. The difference was erotic, those who found love of life, right? And Judaism holds that fast. Now, given that we have to answer for everything we're allowed that we forbid ourselves, let's talk about the next topic. Drugs. Going back to the story of creation, right? We started with this conversation of sex with creation, so let's start with this. God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. To all the animals of the land, to the birds in the sky, and everything that creeps on the earth in which there is a breath of life, I give all these green plants for food." And it was so. So what should we do? What does that mean? Use the plants. What does that mean? Eat them, smoke them. Okay, some would argue yes. That's definitely one way of reading it. I'm going to read you another specific. Sorry, just give me a second. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to. You mentioned smoke them, so I'm going to jump right to this. The Shulchan Aruch. Does anybody know what the Shulchan Aruch is? That's what it means. Yes, but what is it? No, not by Maimonides. Maimonides is Mishnah Torah. Rav Yosef Karo. No, it's okay. Compendium. It's halachic code. If you want to know the answer of a question of how something should be done, this is the answer. Okay? So he talks about, there's a whole chapter in the Mishnah called Bameh Madlikin, but with what shall we light? What are they talking about? Yeah. What kind of candles? Shabbat candles. What can you make? You just make a candle. Well, okay, out of what? Right? So he goes off on that. He says, one should not make the whips, that's a different conversation. That was the first conversation. One should not make the wick for a Sabbath lamp, whether it's a lamp on your table or in your house, from something that the light does not come from the wick itself. So don't use wool, hair, etc. But rather, use that which the light comes from the wick itself. For example, flax, cotton, or canebos. So, interesting, right? I would not have taken Rabbi Caro for a pot smoker. It's on fire. You're smelling it, you're breathing it in. I know, I'm just giving you a hard time, Jerry. So, by the way, so there is this idea, and I know rabbis that would argue for the validity of the opinion that you can smoke pot. We'll put that aside for now. I want to talk about another substance that's found also in Breshit, but a little later, the story of Noah. So, what's the story of Noah? You already know where I'm going, don't you? So tell me the story of Noah. First, not the end yet. We'll get to the end, but tell me the story of Noah. I'm going to get some more water. Tell me the story. All right. So, God says, I'm going to destroy the world, build an ark. What does he do? Builds an ark. He's on the ark for how long? He gets off the ark. So, for those of you that missed, we just retold the story of Noah. 40 days, a lot of rain, gets off the ark. How does he celebrate? And Noah, the man of the land, began and planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. What does it mean, uncovered? So the wine led him to something improper, right? So early on in Breshit, we're warned of the dangers of alcohol. Then in Exodus and Shemot, so the Lord spoke to Moses saying, take the next choice spices, 500 of myrrh, of fragrant cinnamon, 250 of aromatic kane bosem, which is also, some people think kane bosem is cannabis. And you shall anoint Aaron and his sons, consecrating them to me as priests. So I guess that was the first use of CBD oil. But then it says later on in Leviticus, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is the law for all time throughout the ages. Okay, so Vayikra, Leviticus says, do not drink if you're coming to serve me, which who is he talking to? Priests. What service are they talking about? Right. The temple service, and today, this one, duchening, right? Priestly blessing. You can't drink beforehand. If you go to a synagogue where they do duchen, where the Kohanim do bless people, if somebody's drunk, if a priest, a Kohen is drunk, they're not allowed to go up. So we have times when wine we're gonna kind of go in order. We're gonna deal with wine first. We have times with wine when it's absolutely not appropriate, right? When you're coming to do a service, that was for the Kohanim, but it also now got adapted. Who would we say that are the Kohanim today in terms of service, in terms of avodah? Well, alavai, I don't sing that well. Cantors, right? Anybody who's a shliach or shlichat tzibur, anybody who is the prayer leader, right? They're not allowed to drink before they do this. Okay. So that's when you cannot drink. There are a lot of times where it's fine if you drink, fine if you don't. And then let's go to the other side. So here's where you cannot drink. Here's where, okay, drink, don't drink, it's fine, whatever. When should you drink? Purim? When else? Pesach? Shabbat? Simchat Torah? Right? Right, Chagim, not so much Yom Kippur, but the Chag as in terms of the pilgrimage festivals. So not only should you drink on those days, then there's one day a year that you mentioned where it's actually not just a mitzvah supposedly to drink, but it's a mitzvah to what? To get drunk. And that day is Purim. And it says what? How does it phrase it? Until you don't know what? The difference between Haman and Mordechai. So you should drink on Purim until you don't know the difference between the hero and the villain. Now it's interesting to note that commandment or that instruction is given in the Gemara, in the Talmud, and is immediately followed by stories of rabbis that did that and killed each other. Like literally pulled out swords or knives and sliced, right? So even in giving that command, that prescription, it says, by the way, here's what happens when you do. Doesn't end up very well. So it's interesting, right? And it happens to be fortuitous. By the way, this me teaching this class we came up with this way before I knew where I would be starting in July. But it happens to be that it's very interesting that I'm teaching this today. Now, I'm not here to tell you that I don't drink alcohol. Okay? Because what was the text we looked at that transitioned from one subject to the other? That anything that is allowed to you and you don't do, you have to answer for. So for me, I am not an alcoholic. I can have a drink. I'm allowed to have a drink. At Beit Tshuva, where I go, I probably won't have a bottle of Macallan in my office. Right? There what? Not anymore. What? In my office? Oh, right. Oh. Yes, either way, I won't be bringing my alcohol to my office at Beit Tshuva. But, so that which is allowed to me, I am allowed to partake. And what if I come to this synagogue on Simchat Torah? Not me, but what if someone who is an alcoholic comes on Simchat Torah? What do we do on Simchat Torah? What is set up on the sides of this room? There's food and soda on one side, and what's on the other? Alcohol. And what do we have every single Saturday morning in that room? I mean, it's got very little alcohol, but it still has alcohol in it. But the problem isn't even, it's not necessarily them doing it themselves, because if they are truly sober, they won't. What about when you offer? Right? And this shul less so, but I've been a part of many shuls where if you come to the service on certain days of the year, you will have people coming up to you and offering you alcohol. Right? Now, that immediately triggers in my head one verse in the Torah. Lifnei iver lo titen michshol. Do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Right? If someone is an alcoholic, don't put a stumbling block. Don't set them up for failure. By the way, this also, when it comes to what people are eating at Kiddush can also be something. If somebody's trying to be healthier or eat healthier and we say, oh, you're barely eating or you're not eating or have some of this, like, you keep your eyes on your plate and let them be in charge of their plate, both for good and bad. If they're eating too much and you think it's too much, shut up. No offense. All right? Yeah, no, don't. Oh, you look so, you're skin and bones. You're skin and bones, darling. Although my grandmother, one of my grandmothers, God bless her, she said, my father's mother, you can never be two things. Do you know what she said? Yep, my grandmother always used to say, you can never be too rich or too thin. Okay. You can charge me for the hour of session of therapy that you've just given me. Yeah. Are you talking about in the shul? You don't need to offer it. Yeah, I don't think it's fine if it's just there. I wouldn't offer it, is what I'm saying. If it's there on the table, it's very clear that it's for anybody who wants to go over, who's 21, obviously, and drink. You don't have to go up to somebody and say, would you like a drink? I don't think that's yeah. Wait, sorry, hold on, Jerry, hold on a second. Yeah, I would say you shouldn't. Yeah, I would say you shouldn't go up and offer somebody a drink. Lemon or etrog alcohol? Okay. All right, Jerry. I've never seen them walk around with trays. People walk around with. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Listen, I'm just telling you, I don't think it's a great idea. I don't think it's a great idea, and people can find it if they need it. By the way, so this is a conversation about drugs in general, right? We're talking about alcohol right now, but it's about every single one of you does drugs. I know I do. Every single day. My favorite drug, it's not even a question. Coffee is, it's nectar of the gods. My children know what it's called. My children say, it's Dada wake-up juice. No joke. And they're right. I used to not understand, when people are like, I haven't had my morning coffee yet, I can't X, Y, or Z. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's true, though, right? For those of you that are teachers or work early, oh, my God. Okay, so then the conversation about drugs and alcohol comes in the book of Devarim in Deuteronomy. And it says, if someone has a wayward and defiant son, right? Does anybody know what that is in Hebrew? Ben Soreh Umorer. Ben Sorer Umorer, right? A wayward and rebellious child. They shall say to the elders of this town, the son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And the men shall go and stone him to death. Now, I didn't bring all of the additional information about this. Sorry? It's possible. I don't remember the parsha. The rabbis say that no person has ever fulfilled the requirements for this person. But one thing they do mention is the idea of a drunkard, right? That there is something about alcohol. And in Proverbs, wine is a scoffer. Strong drink is a roisterer. Meaning a roisterer is, I think it like riles up. He who is muddled by them, by strong drink, will not grow wise. Another verse in Proverbs, he who loves pleasure comes to want. He who loves wine and oil does not grow rich. All right? So there is a lot of warning about this idea of being a wayward or wayward and rebellious. Yeah, it's not. The rabbis go out of their way to say it's never a daughter, and all of these different reasons. The rabbis make it impossible to. All right, now in the Gemara, do not. Rav said to Chia, his son. So here's a parent giving advice: do not get into the habit of drinking medications, lest you develop an addiction. And do not leap over a ditch, as you might hurt yourself. Okay, so maybe one of those was really good advice. The other one was, all right, fine. But they have this idea of of just being aware of things. But then there are others, right? So Tablet Magazine. You guys know what Tablet Magazine is? Tablet Magazine. It's a Jewish magazine online. And it recently did an article about the OU, the Orthodox Union, talking about medical marijuana. And they said they've rejected kosher certification requests from cigarette and e-cigarette manufacturers, but they would not have a problem certifying medical marijuana. Right? So there is a concept. There are some people who find legitimate use of marijuana. There are people who smoke cigarettes too. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. Right. So it's interesting. I'm going to give you two more opinions, then I'm going to say a couple words. Rabbi Elliot Dorff, he says, Judaism allows Jews to ingest many things that are not intrinsically holy as a part of the effort to fulfill the responsibility to maintain a healthy body, mind, soul. Whether using marijuana recreationally fits into that description of the nature and purpose of life depends on what its effects turned out to be. If it decreases pain in dying patients, then one not only may, but must work to make it legally available. In sum, marijuana in and of itself is not inherently bad or good. It must be judged in terms of its effect in creating a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Right? There are a lot of things, right? It's kind of in the way Rabbi Dorff phrases it is similar to the way we talked about sex or the way we talk about eating. It's not moral or immoral, it's amoral, and it's what we do with it. Now, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shlomi, does anybody know who that was? He was a part of the renewal, Jewish renewal. He saw it a little differently. He said, God too is playing a game of hide and seek with himself and me. The psychedelic experience can be not only a challenge, but also a support of my faith. The psychedelic experience can not only be, says that twice. I can see Judaism in a new and amazing light. The only thing I want to add is that just as the use of wine has been sacralized for Judaism, right, making a sacramental, and sexuality has been sacramentalized with kiddushim, powerful substances like cannabis also need to be sacralized. Here's where I would part company with Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shlomi. We're doing okay on intoxicants right now. I don't think we need any more. Right? It's interesting because I remember this must be about 17 years ago. 17 years ago, I interviewed for a job, and the person with whom I was interviewing asked me a hypothetical question. I was interviewing, I think it was a youth director job for USY, and they said, what would you say to a child who asked you about whether or not you've ever done drugs? And I don't remember the answer I gave, but I remember the answer I came out with. He and I had a conversation about it, and I came out with this answer and have subsequently used it when asked. So if somebody asks me if I've ever smoked pot or done drugs, I say to them the same thing. I'm not going to answer the question. And I'm going to explain why I'm not going to answer the question. Because if I say no, then I'm a square who can't relate to the question. And if I say yes, I'm giving you permission. So there's no way I win in this conversation, right? And I think when it comes to marijuana, what Rabbi Dorff says is very important. There are people who use it with very or almost no ill effect. I would argue anybody that uses it every single day, that in and of itself is a problem, right? Some people have addictive personalities, some people don't. You've seen it with alcohol. Marijuana is the same thing, right? I'm not going to get into the legalization or not because that seems like that ship has sailed anyway. But then there are other drugs, right? Oh yeah, he was clearly not just talking. He mentions marijuana by name, but he wasn't only talking about marijuana. Zalman Schachter Shlomi, and I disagree. I mean, I think he was very much part of that Timothy Leary. What is it? Tune in, drop out, right? Or free your mind, or whatever it was. I think that is a big impact on his teaching. I want to leave time for questions. I know we've covered a lot of material. Please, not everybody at once. Is this all? Yeah. I think that, so either you, if you don't do it, you regret it. What's the other way of reading it? No, I know, but what are the options? Right, so pleasures in which you can partake, you should. You shouldn't deny yourself things that you're allowed. It's the same with thing, and I think it's coming up very soon, actually. We're going to read about somebody who denies themselves things that are allowed in the Torah. Does anybody know who I'm talking about? A Nazir, a Nazirite, right? Someone who's not allowed to drink wine, someone who's chaste, someone who's all these things. Now, a Nazirite is allowed to take the vow for 30 days and 30 days only. And when they do this vow, they can't do certain things that the rest of us are allowed to do. And when they're done with the vow, they have to come and bring a sacrifice. Does anybody know what sacrifice they bring? They bring something called a chatat offering, which is a what? A sin offering, chatat. Because they didn't partake fully in life, they actually transgressed. And I think that text is saying something similar to that. Jerry, you had something to say? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, right. I think also the reason I really wanted to talk about this is because Judaism has evolved in so many different ways, and we live Judaism closely to how we live our lives, and there are certain subjects in which that's not the case. And I think sex is one of them. We can talk about all kinds of moral and philosophical issues on how to live our life with Judaism at its core, and sex doesn't really come up in one of those, and I wanted to fix that. It's also, I wanted to bring Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who's one of the great rabbis of the 20th century, who talks about marijuana, and he says it's obvious that this is prohibited from multiple perspectives. First, the fact that it harms the body. It also harms the mind, and one cannot understand something deeply, which impinges Torah study. It also causes a deep passion greater than hunger, and there are those who can't overcome these desires. So there's this concept that the first part I wanted to mention was this idea that it harms the body. You are not allowed to do things that harm you, right? So there is a whole tshuva or a whole rabbinic literature about smoking. And basically they said, if you're already smoking, we can't tell you to stop, though you should. But if you aren't smoking, it is forbidden to take up smoking. I would say marijuana falls very similar into that, though I know marijuana to be more dangerous. And my generation is so messed up that people think that cigarette smoking is more dangerous than marijuana. And for me, the only proof I need of how that's not the case is nobody ever has smoked a cigarette, then gotten into a car and gotten into an accident because of the cigarette they smoked. Yes, can you get lung cancer? No doubt. But it does not have the same effect of impeding or impinging on your other senses in a way that marijuana does, right? Now, alcohol, marijuana is a more similar conversation. But anything you do that can harm you, stop. That's pretty easy. And that's actually, right, we know how important saving a life and preservation of life is in Judaism, and that takes precedence over everything. It can, but not inevitably, right? So smoking a cigarette, if you can smoke as often as other people drink, I don't know how one cigarette versus one drink affects your liver, your lungs. I'm not a doctor. But if you could do it on the same rate or same ratio, I would argue that they are similar, right? The fact that very few people smoke a cigarette here or there, whereas more people can drink here or there, is a very different kind of thing. Does that make sense? Ma'od. What else? Yes, one more for Jerry, for 500. Well, regrets are different than harm, because we all do things we regret, and we don't know that going in. So the question about tattoos. In a Jewish cemetery, right. Right, you can absolutely be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Right. It's more and more accepted in society in general, and it's more and more accepted by Jews in society because that's the same thing, basically. Listen, I don't have a moral obligation to tattoos. I don't have a Jewish obligation to tattoos. It's very clear there were tattoos in the ancient world. Right, and there's absolutely nothing forbidden about piercing. Men with pierced ears is not forbidden at all. Right. Right. And that's men and women wearing earrings in the golden calf, by the way. I think you actually stand out more at this point if you don't have a tattoo. So for originality's sake, I say don't, but that's just me. Yeah, I'm sure other rabbis will have a lot to say about tattoos from the rabbi's pulpit. You're asking this rabbi, which is bad move by you. I have no moral obligation to it. I think that if you know wholeheartedly that there's something you want on your body for the rest of your life, sei gesund, enjoy, go for it. I don't know. Now, how old are your grandkids? I was going to say, I don't want your, elementary school kids getting tattoos in the schoolyard. That'd be great. That'd be crazy. No, I know. Listen, it is what it is, and people do People, they're going to make, here's the problem with grandkids and kids. They're going to do what they want. Is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you. Yeah, so Java and Jeans is happening this Saturday. It's an abbreviated Java and Jeans. It's just 1 hour. 9:45 to 10:45. After that. I already spoke to Rabbi Vogel about it. Correct.